The year was 1980, and Barbra Streisand, one of the most powerful voices of the 20th century, stood at a crossroads. She had conquered Broadway, she had ruled Hollywood, she had dominated the charts in the 60s and 70s. But as a new decade dawned, something unsettling crept into the headlines. Whispers that her sound no longer fit the times. Disco was fading, rock was loud, punk was raw, pop was evolving fast, and younger stars were filling the airwaves. Streisand's last albums had performed well, but they didn't set the charts on fire the way they once had. Some critics, unfairly biased, began calling her out of step. And then, something happened. A collaboration no one saw coming. Barry Gibb, the creative heartbeat of the Bee Gees, was fresh from his own whirlwind of success. He had just survived the disco backlash that nearly crushed his band's career. And now, somehow, these two music giants would collide. And the result would become one of the most successful pop albums of all time. But this wasn't just a hit record. It was a rescue, a reinvention, a bold gamble that could have backfired spectacularly. So how exactly did Barry Gibb step in and help deliver Barbra Streisand her biggest-selling album ever? The answer is more dramatic than you might think. If you love uncovering the hidden turning points behind music legends, make sure you subscribe to RetroWaves. We dig deeper than the headlines to bring you the stories they never told, until now, like this one. By 1979, Barbra Streisand's career was anything but over, but it was at a point where every next move mattered. Her name was still gold in the entertainment world. She could sell out concerts, command movie roles, and appear on magazine covers at will. But music was changing. In the 70s, Streisand had dominated with powerhouse ballads and carefully crafted pop standards. Albums like A Star Is Born, 1976, kept her relevant in film and music at the same time. But behind the glitter and gold records, there was a quiet reality. The next generation of pop stars wasn't waiting for anyone. Donna Summer was pushing dance music to the forefront. Billy Joel, Fleetwood Mac, and the Eagles were defining the FM radio era. Michael Jackson was about to moonwalk into history. For Streisand, the challenge wasn't talent, it was timing. She needed a sound that could bridge her dramatic theatrical style with a fresher, more contemporary edge. She needed someone who understood hit-making in the new decade, without losing what made her voice timeless. Enter Barry Gibb. By 1980, Gibb had just weathered the storm of the disco sucks movement. The Bee Gees, once untouchable hitmakers, had seen radio stations refuse to play their music after the backlash. But Barry's songwriting genius had never dimmed. He had a gift for crafting melodies that were both modern and emotional, and for giving other artists their career-defining hits. When Gibb and Streisand finally connected, it wasn't a safe choice, it was a risk. Streisand's audience expected elegance and classic arrangements. Gibb's name was still linked to disco. The pairing could alienate both fan bases. But what happened next would silence every doubt. The idea began as a spark, a conversation between Streisand's team and Gibb's circle about the possibility of a collaboration. At first, it was just talk. But when Gibb sent over a few demo tracks, something clicked instantly. One of those demos would become Woman in Love. It was lush, dramatic, and written to soar. Exactly the kind of song that could showcase Streisand's voice at its most powerful. But it also carried the Barry Gibb touch, a pop sensibility, a rhythmic pulse, and a lyrical style that sounded nothing like her earlier work. From the start, Gibb was more than just a songwriter. He insisted on producing the entire album, shaping the arrangements, and crafting a cohesive sound. He brought in Albee Galutin and Carl Richardson, the production trio responsible for the Bee Gees' biggest hits, to give the project that signature polish. It wasn't about forcing Streisand into the Bee Gees' mold, It was about building a new musical space where she could shine without sounding dated. Still, the stakes were high. Critics could accuse her of chasing trends, fans could reject the sound. And in the back of everyone's mind was the fear that if this album missed the mark, it could confirm those whispers that Streisand's chart reign was over. But in the recording studio, none of that mattered. Gibb and Streisand clicked in a way few superstar pairings ever do. He admired her precision and discipline. She admired his instinct and energy. Together, they crafted something that felt bold but true. And when they decided to record a duet together, the title track, Guilty.
And we got nothing to begin our love.
It was clear this was more than a producer-artist relationship. This was a genuine creative partnership. The real question was, would the world hear it the same way? When the recording sessions began in earnest, Streisand and Gibb were stepping into uncharted territory. The sessions took place at Criteria Studios in Miami, the same space where the Bee Gees had recorded Saturday Night Fever. But the atmosphere this time was different. Gibb wasn't there to write a Bee Gees album for Streisand. He wanted to create something that played to her vocal strengths, but pushed her into fresh, unexplored territory. His songs leaned into sweeping romantic themes, but with a modern pop rhythm that kept them from sounding like Broadway ballads. One early challenge was tone. Streisand's voice was famously precise, each note held with diamond clarity. Gibb's style was looser, built on feel and groove. Sometimes he'd encourage her to relax the phrasing, to let the song breathe. At first it felt unnatural, but soon she started to enjoy the freedom. This creative push and pull led to magic. Tracks like Run Wild and Promises carried that blend of structure and spontaneity.
Into your yesterday, but healing, can you learn to grow out in a world of tears?
And then there was What Kind of Fool, a duet so intimate it sounded like a private conversation set to music.
I only apologize for being.
Behind the scenes, though, there was still uncertainty. The Bee Gees' name was, at the time, a lightning rod for critics still hung up on the death of disco. Would Streisand's audience accept Barry's heavy fingerprints on her work? The answer would come soon enough. In September 1980, the first single, Woman in Love, hit the airwaves. It wasn't just a hit, it was an earthquake. The song rocketed to #1 in over a dozen countries, including the US, where it stayed at the top for 3 weeks. In the UK, it became her first #1 single since A Star Is Born. And perhaps most importantly, it introduced Streisand to a younger pop audience who had never really listened to her before. Woman in Love was tailor-made for her range, sweeping verses, a soaring chorus, and lyrics that blurred the line between vulnerability and defiance. Streisand later admitted in interviews that it was one of the most challenging songs she'd ever sung, but also one of her proudest performances. The industry took notice. The narrative shifted almost overnight. Suddenly, those whispers about her being out of step with modern music were gone. But Gibb wasn't done. Next came the release of the full album, Guilty. And here's where the gamble truly paid off. The album didn't just sell well, it exploded. Within weeks, it climbed to the top of the Billboard 200. It went on to sell over 15 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling album of Streisand's career, a record it still holds. 3 singles from the album, Woman in Love, Guilty, and What Kind of Fool, all reached the top 10 in the US. That kind of run was rare for any artist, let alone one entering her 3rd decade in the industry. Critics who had once questioned the collaboration now praised it. Rolling Stone called the album elegantly contemporary, Others noted how Gibb had preserved Streisand's classic glamour while giving her a modern edge. And there was the visual element. The album cover, featuring Streisand and Gibb in white, cheek to cheek, became instantly iconic, a symbol of their creative and personal chemistry. But behind that smiling photo, there was more than just a working relationship. There was trust and a shared understanding of what it meant to fight for relevance in a changing industry. Barry Gibb's role in Guilty wasn't just musical, it was deeply personal. He stepped into the project at a moment when Streisand was facing an unspoken pressure, prove she could still dominate in a decade that was rapidly rewriting the rules of pop music. In a 1980 interview, Gibb admitted he'd been in awe of her for years, calling her the most precise, committed vocalist I've ever seen. That respect made him protective of her artistic identity. He wasn't there to erase her history. He was there to make sure the world remembered why she was untouchable. But there was a flip side to that respect. Gibb wasn't afraid to challenge her. In the studio, he sometimes asked her to sing lines over and over until they captured the exact emotion he heard in his head. Streisand, known for her perfectionism, didn't bristle at the demands. She thrived under them. Their creative rapport became obvious to everyone around them. Engineers recalled how the two would spend hours discussing a single lyric, weighing how it might be heard by fans in Tokyo versus New York. Gibb wanted global resonance, and he knew Streisand's voice could carry it. This wasn't just about making hits, it was about making history. And as the weeks of recording rolled on, it became clear that they weren't just aiming for a commercially successful record. They were building a body of work that could stand alongside Streisand's greatest achievements. When the album was finished, Gibb didn't simply hand it over and walk away. He stood by it, defending it in the press, promoting it as if it were his own comeback. In a way, it was. The triumph of Guilty didn't fade after its first chart run. It lingered, shaping both artists' trajectories for decades. For Streisand, the album gave her the confidence to push into other stylistic experiments in the 80s, duets with artists like Neil Diamond, covers of contemporary pop songs, and even dance-infused tracks later in the decade. She had proof that she could break the mold without breaking her brand. For Gibb, it solidified his reputation as one of the most adaptable songwriters and producers of his generation. Even as the Bee Gees' own radio airplay waned in the U.S., Gibb's behind-the-scenes work with other artists kept his name in the charts. And the partnership didn't end in 1980. Over the years, Gibb and Streisand stayed in touch, always circling back to the idea of a reunion. Fans kept asking for it. Every time they appeared together, whether on talk shows or tributes, the nostalgia for Guilty was palpable. When they finally reunited in 2005 for Guilty Pleasures, released internationally as Guilty 2, the music press framed it as a full-circle moment. While the sales were smaller in the age of digital downloads, critics praised it for recapturing the warmth and sophistication of the original. It wasn't about chasing trends anymore. It was about celebrating a connection that had stood the test of time. And here's what's remarkable. Even with a quarter-century gap between projects, the chemistry was immediate. The studio chatter, the shared jokes, the mutual trust, all of it was still there. It confirmed what fans had long suspected. The magic of Guilty wasn't a fluke. Picture it. February 25, 1981, the Grammy Awards, the industry's biggest night. Barbra Streisand and Barry Gibb walk on stage together, greeted by an eruption of applause. They're here not just as performers, but as co-architects of one of the year's most dominant albums. The opening chords of Guilty fill the room, and for the next few minutes, they lock into the same easy chemistry that had defined their sessions in Miami. The audience, a mix of established stars, industry executives, and up-and-coming hopefuls, is riveted. This isn't just a duet, it's a statement. Two artists from different corners of the musical universe, proving that great music knows no boundaries. When they finish, the standing ovation is immediate. Later that night, when Guilty wins the Grammy for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group, Streisand thanks Gibb directly from the stage. Her voice catches slightly as she says, "You gave me something I didn't even know I needed." Gibb responds with a grin and a hug, and in that moment, the cameras capture something the charts and sales numbers can't measure: the emotional truth behind their collaboration. But what the public didn't know was how close this moment had come to not existing at all. If Streisand had chosen a safer, more traditional producer, if Gibb had retreated from high-profile projects after the disco backlash, this chapter in music history might never have been written. Instead, they both took a risk, and they both won. So, did Barry Gibb save Barbra Streisand's career? If we stick strictly to verified facts, Streisand was never in danger of fading into obscurity. She remained one of the most bankable names in entertainment, but Guilty gave her something even rarer than consistent fame: the ability to stay at the center of the cultural conversation well into a new era. The album didn't just sell millions, it shifted the way people thought about her music. It bridged the gap between her older audience and a new generation who heard her for the first time. And for Barry Gibb, Guilty became a blueprint for artistic reinvention, proof that his talents could thrive far beyond the Bee Gees brand. It was a personal and professional redemption. In interviews decades later, Streisand has referred to Guilty as a gift. Gibb, meanwhile, has called it one of the highlights of my life. That's the real takeaway here. Not a rescue story, but a partnership story. Two careers, two legacies, and one album that bound them together in a way no one could have predicted. In the end, perhaps the question isn't whether Barry Gibb saved Barbra Streisand's career, but whether, in some way, they saved each other's. Now that you know the untold story of Guilty, here's a challenge for you. Think of another moment in music history when two seemingly different worlds collided to create something timeless. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you love uncovering these behind-the-scenes turning points, make sure you're subscribed to RetroWaves.